Chapter 1. The Funeral of Titan. The rain came down in a thin, steady sheet that felt almost intentional, as if the sky had been waiting for Charles Montgomery to die before finally cutting loose. The kind of rain that didn't drench you, but clung to your skin like cold static. The kind of rain Charles would have called dramatic bullshit while lighting a cigar. I stood under the tall, iron gates of the Montgomery family cemetery, hands in my coat pockets, watching the procession of luxury cars snake their way across the gravel. Black Mercedes, black BMWs, black Escalades. A sea of polished metal carrying people who had never cared about Charles one day in their lives, but suddenly needed to be here to pretend they did. A woman in a feathery black hat sniffled loudly into a tissue, then snapped a selfie the moment she thought no one was watching. I watched. I watched everything. The world had lost a Titan. Most of these people just lost an excuse to chase clout. I adjusted my tie and stepped forward. Charles Montgomery, father-in-law, mentor, headache, hurricane, and the only man I had ever seen tame a Fortune 500 boardroom with nothing but a raised eyebrow, was being lowered into the ground today. And the sharks were circling before the coffin even touched dirt. The first shark spotted me. Victor Hale, board chairman, face like a frozen sculpture, suit sharp enough to commit a felony with. He drifted toward me with that politician smile of his, all gums, no soul. "Lucas," he said, putting a stiff hand on my shoulder. "Terrible loss. Tragic. Unexpected." Unexpected? Charles had been sick for months. The board just didn't notice because they were too busy fighting over who would get to polish the throne once he was gone. I nodded. "Victor." His eyes flickered, searching my face for something, weakness, maybe grief, maybe information. Something he could use. "Your wife," he said, glancing toward the crowd. "She's handling herself well today. Strong woman." I didn't respond, because I saw Elena before he even mentioned her. She stood near the front row like she was posing for a magazine cover rather than attending her father's funeral. Perfect black dress, perfect makeup, chin angled slightly to catch the soft light. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue, but I didn't see any tears fall. A photographer from one of the corporate press outlets zoomed in with his camera. Elena tilted her head just a little. Of course she did. Victor followed my gaze. She'll make a fine public face for the company. That was the moment he slipped the first hairline crack in the board's mask. The assumption, the belief that Charles Montgomery's empire was already theirs to mold, to manipulate, to harvest. I forced a polite smile. Time will tell. Victor drifted away to shake another hand. He had no idea the entire future of Montgomery Industries was sitting 3 feet away from him, staring at muddy shoes and pretending to be unimportant. Good, Charles would have said. The board can't betray what they don't understand. A tap on my arm pulled me from thought. "Lucas," came a nasal, over-energetic voice. Bryce Whitman, board member, nepotism's favorite son. He adjusted his ridiculous umbrella, custom-printed with the Montgomery Industries logo. At a funeral. He grinned. "Crazy turnout today, huh?" "Lot of people love the old man. Most of them loved his money," I replied. Bryce barked a laugh, oblivious to the edge in my tone. "Right? Right? God, I knew you got it. Elena's lucky. Lucky, right?" His gaze bounced around the cemetery like a hyperactive pinball. "Hey, by the way, after all this settles, we should grab drinks. Talk about things. Changes. New directions." I raised a brow. "New directions?" He leaned closer. "Between us, the company needs a little modernization. Fresh blood. Young leadership." He nodded toward Elena, who was now talking to a journalist with her chin held high. "I mean, look at that. She's a natural." I didn't answer. Bryce didn't notice. He never did. But someone else did. Whitman, a crisp voice cut in. "You're blocking the aisle." Margaret Shunn stepped between us, her umbrella neatly angled to shield both of us without touching Bryce at all. CFO. Smartest person in any room she entered. The only board member who wasn't a complete clown. Her eyes met mine. Sharp. Calculated. "You holding up?" she asked. "Trying," I said. She nodded once, respectfully. "Charles valued you." "Did he ever say that?" Bryce interrupted. "Yes," Margaret replied without flinching. "Frequently." Bryce blinked. "Huh. Margaret moved on. Bryce followed her like a lost puppy. I stayed behind, letting the crowd shift around me like dark water. People murmured business condolences, networking condolences, fake condolences. They shook hands over Charles's grave like it was a damn shareholders meeting. Then the priest began speaking, and everyone moved into formation. I took my place in the front row beside Elena. She didn't look at me. Not when the priest praised Charles's philanthropy. Not when they lowered the coffin. Not when people sniffled around us. She only leaned closer when a camera lifted, her voice barely above a whisper. Fix your tie. Right. Optics mattered more than grief. When the final prayers faded, I glanced at the coffin, at the polished mahogany, now wet with rain, and memories pressed in like ghosts. Late-night meetings in Charles's study. His gravel-deep laugh. The way he slammed his fist on the table when the board did something stupid, which was often, almost daily. Lucas, he once told me, swirling whiskey at midnight, if those idiots ever take over, bury me twice. Another memory surfaced, sharper. Charles sitting across from me, pale but fiery, pointing a stack of documents. They think my daughter will run this company, he said with a humorless smile. They think they'll puppet her. But he jabbed a finger at me. You're the one with a brain. You're the only one who sees them for what they are. I had laughed nervously. Charles, they hate me. They fear you, he corrected. There's a difference. He leaned forward. One day, you'll understand why. That day hadn't come yet. Not officially, not publicly, not until the time was right. But as I stood in the rain, listening to people who never respected Charles pretend they adored him, I felt his last words echo through me, grounding me. The ceremony ended. People walked toward the reception tent. Elena finally looked at me, not with sadness, but with calculation. We should go, she whispered. The press is waiting. I looked at her, then at the board members circling like vultures, then at the muddy path leading to the tent filled with forced smiles and opportunistic condolences. And quietly, beneath the hum of umbrellas and footsteps, a tension simmered deep in my chest. It wasn't grief. It wasn't anger. It was anticipation. The funeral of a titan had ended, and the ripples were just beginning. Chapter 2. Charles's Secret. It was 3 weeks before the funeral. 3 weeks before the board would swarm like hyenas around a fresh carcass. 3 weeks before Elena would slap on her camera-ready grief and pose for headlines. 3 weeks before Charles Montgomery, titan of industry and professional terror of incompetent executives, would drop the biggest secret of my life onto my lap. It started with a text. Charles, come to the house. Bring a pen. No explanation. No context. No hint of what the hell he meant. Just that. When I arrived at the Montgomery estate, the butler led me through the echoing marble foyer, past portraits of ancestors who all looked like they were judging my shoes, and into Charles's private study, a place no one entered without invitation. He was sitting by the fireplace in a thick robe, oxygen tank at his side, looking like a king who refused to abdicate even as his body betrayed him. The firelight flickered across his sharp blue eyes too alive for a man that's sick. You're late, he grumbled. You texted me 8 minutes ago. Then you're 8 minutes late. That was Charles, dying, but still insufferably himself. I closed the door behind me. What's going on? He didn't answer at first. Instead, he reached for a folder on the side table, heavy and thick, stamped with legal seals and ribbons, the kind that made your stomach drop before you even knew why. Sit, he ordered. I did. He pushed the folder toward me. Open it. Inside were at least 30 pages of legal language, signatures, certifications, notarizations, all involving Montgomery Industries and Lucas Ward in ways that made my heartbeat land in my throat. Is this? Yes, he said. 71%. I blinked. Of the company? Of course the company, he snapped. What else would I leave you? My stamp collection. The room narrowed to a pinpoint. Charles, this makes no sense. Why me? He leaned back, wheezing slightly as he adjusted the oxygen tube. Elena, he said, is a beautiful girl. Clever in social spaces. Good with cameras. Great with press. She knows how to smile on cue. How to make a room adore her. But business. He scoffed. She has all the strategic depth of a teaspoon. I swallowed hard. She's your daughter. And I love her, he said sharply. But love doesn't make someone a CEO. Look at her Instagram. She chooses hashtags the way a general chooses artillery. Optics, aesthetics, popularity. His eyes hardened. If I hand her the company, the board will eat her alive before the ink dries. He inhaled slowly, fighting for breath, then continued. You, on the other hand, you watch. You listen. You see. You understand that business is not about noise, it's about leverage. I couldn't speak. My mind spun. Charles, Elena will never forgive me. She won't know. He tapped the folder. Not until the time is right. I exhaled shakily. You want me to lie to her? I want you to protect her, he corrected. From a board. From herself. From the circus that will follow when I'm gone. I stared at him. She'll be furious. She'll be alive, he said simply. Silence stretched. He lifted a second document, holding it out to me. His hand trembled faintly. These papers are notarized. Ironclad. Prepared months ago, before my health declined. This is not a last-minute decision. This is strategy. I took the papers, my fingers brushing the thick legal parchment. 71%, Lucas, he repeated. You will own this company the moment I stop breathing. The weight of his words settled like iron around my ribs. What about the board? I asked quietly. Charles's lips curled into a slow, wicked smile. The smile he wore whenever someone on his board said something stupid in a meeting. The board, he said, are idiots. I almost laughed. You pick them. I didn't pick them for their brains, he shot back. I picked them for their predictability. His eyes glinted. A smart enemy is dangerous. A stupid one is manageable. I sat back, the reality sinking in. Charles continued, voice low and gravelly. They think you're harmless because you stay quiet. They think you're irrelevant because you don't claw for attention. You let them underestimate you. Because I had to, I murmured. Because it works, he corrected. One day, you'll sit in my chair. And when you do, you'll need every ounce of misdirection you've practiced. I rubbed my temples. I don't know if I want this. He snorted. No one wants responsibility until it's theirs. Then they learn. He picked up a pen from the table, a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen engraved with the Montgomery seal, and held it out. Sign. I stared at it. My hand felt heavy, anchored by morality, fear, loyalty, something undefined. The fire crackled quietly behind us. Charles, I whispered, this will change everything. It's supposed to. His voice softened for the first time. I trust you more than I trust any man alive. More than I trusted my own board. More than Elena understands. I looked at him. Really looked at him. This wasn't just a business move. It was a dying man placing his life's work, his empire, into my hands. He lowered his voice. If those fools take control after I'm gone, they'll dismantle everything I built. They'll sell the assets, mismanage departments, chase trends like blind mice following cheese on strings. They will burn this company to the ground. His eyes locked onto mine. You won't let them. A long silence followed. Rain tapped faintly against the window, though the sky outside was still bright, as if even the weather couldn't decide how to feel. Finally, I took the pen. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what I was about to do. I signed, page after page. Initials, full signature, date, confirmation, a legal chain tightening around a future I wasn't sure I wanted, but knew I couldn't reject. When I finished, Charles let out a satisfied exhale. There, he said, Montgomery Industries will survive my death, and it will thrive under you. He reached for his whiskey glass, doctor's orders be damned, took a sip, and smirked. You're going to have fun with them, Lucas. Especially Victor. That pompous bastard has no idea you're about to inherit the kingdom. I let out a breathy laugh. You're terrifying. I'm dying, he corrected. That's different. I looked down at the signed pages, at the weight of an empire handed quietly to the man no one in that boardroom took seriously. Charles's eyes softened again. Promise me something, he said. Promise you won't tell Elena. Not yet. Not until the moment is right. I hesitated. Then I nodded. I promise. He smiled, tired but triumphant. Good. Now get out of my study before I make you read financial forecasts for fun. I stood, folder in hand, still stunned, still conflicted, still unsure how to breathe under the pressure he had just placed on me. As I reached the door, he called out one last time. "And Lucas." I looked back. His grin widened. "When the board finds out, do enjoy the moment. Those idiots deserve it." Chapter 3. A new CEO and a week of pretending. The funeral was barely 48 hours behind us when Elena announced she was hosting a small celebration at the penthouse. "Just a tiny gathering," she said, applying lipstick in the hallway mirror. "Close friends, board members, press, influencers. Nothing huge. Nothing huge." When Elena said those words, what she meant was a full-blown PR spectacle. By the time the first guests arrived, the penthouse looked like a set for a luxury brand commercial. Chandeliers dimmed low, velvet ropes at the entrance, a hired photographer circling like a vulture, a bartender mixing cocktails with edible gold flakes, and a DJ who wore sunglasses indoors like it was a personality trait. All of this for a woman whose father had been buried less than a week ago. Elena stepped into the center of the room, wearing a backless black dress, stunning, flawless, calculated. She raised a champagne flute and smiled in a way that belonged on magazine covers. "Cheers to new beginnings," she announced as cameras flashed. I stood near the balcony, nursing a drink I hadn't touched, pretending to be wallpaper. Exactly as Charles instructed. The board arrives like bees to sweet, manipulatable honey. Victor Hale walked in first, of course, gliding like he owned the place. The chairman never missed an opportunity to assert his existence. "Elena," he said warmly, "you are radiant tonight." She slid into his arms for a photo op hug, making sure her best angle faced the nearest camera. "Thank you, Victor," she purred. Behind him came Bryce Whitman, lopsided grin, slick hair, and a suit pattern loud enough to cause migraines. "CEO, Elena Montgomery Ward," Bryce announced dramatically as if revealing the next Marvel superhero. "Damn, that title looks good on you." She giggled. He basked in it. Next was Margaret Shunn, moving with her usual quiet competence. No theatrics, no grand entrance. She simply nodded politely and handed Elena a small envelope. "A card," Margaret said. "Condolences and congratulations." Elena barely glanced at it before shifting her attention to the photographer. Gerald Foster followed after, leaning heavily on his cane, his wife escorting him. He gave Elena a gentle smile, the only person here who seemed to remember she'd lost a father. I watched them all swarm around her like moths to a ring light, every one of them projecting sympathy with their faces and opportunism with their eyes. Optics over everything. "Lucas." I turned. Elena was beckoning me with manicured fingers. "Come stand next to me for this shot," she said. The photographer lifted his camera. I stepped beside her. She wrapped an arm around me, her body angled toward the camera. "Smile, babe," she whispered without looking at me. "Try to look like we had a normal week." Click. Flash. Click. Then the moment she thought the camera turned, she dropped her arm and drifted away to greet a tech influencer with 2 million followers. I was dismissed, which was convenient. Invisibility was exactly what I needed. The board smells blood. Victor waited until Elena was distracted before approaching me. "Lucas," he said, hands behind his back, voice polite to the point of insincerity. "How are you holding up?" "Fine," I said. He studied me. Carefully. Too carefully. "You seem quiet." I smiled faintly, just trying to stay out of the spotlight. "Of course," he murmured. "Yes, of course you are." He wasn't convinced. Victor was many things, arrogant, power-hungry, condescending, but he wasn't stupid. Something about me bothered him. Maybe it was Charles's old habit of clapping me on the shoulder after meetings. Maybe it was the way Charles once said, "Lucas sees more than all of you combined." Victor had never liked that. Before he could pry more, Bryce materialized, clapping me on the back hard enough to jolt air from my lungs. "There he is." Bryce laughed. "Montgomery Industries' very own. What was it again?" "Oh, right, the guy who prints reports." A few nearby board members chuckled. I gave him a calm smile, even though I could see Victor's eyes glint with amusement. "Nice to be recognized," I replied lightly. Bryce raised his glass. "Cheers to staying in your lane, buddy." Victor gave a small laugh. Indeed, they thought they were punching down. They didn't realize they were punching the man holding the detonator. I maintained my harmless smile and stepped aside, letting them believe every incorrect assumption they had ever made about me. Elena's stage. The DJ lowered the music, and Elena clicked her glass against a microphone. "Everyone, may I have your attention?" she said, her voice smooth from hours of rehearsed grief. "I wanted to thank you all for being here. My father believed in leadership, in legacy, in brilliance." She placed a hand on her chest dramatically. "And I promised to honor his vision as the new CEO of Montgomery Industries." Phones lifted. Cameras flashed. Bryce looked like he was about to cry with pride. Margaret gave a small, respectful nod. Gerald clapped gently. Victor stood slightly behind Elena, smiling as if he were already pulling invisible puppet strings. After her speech, Elena strutted through the crowd, basking in the congratulations and hashtags being built around her. Hashtag New Era. Hashtag Women in Leadership. Hashtag Montgomery Legacy. Not a single business plan. Not a single financial strategy. Just aesthetics. Exactly as Charles predicted. The perfect illusion. I leaned against the balcony railing again, feeling the cool night breeze roll over my face. Below, the city glowed with its own kind of ruthless ambition. Inside, the board courted Elena with their honeyed words and hollow promises. And me? I stayed in the background. Harmless. Forgettable. Dismissible. Bryce passed by again and snorted toward me. "Man, must be weird being married to a CEO now. Don't worry. Maybe she'll let you file her paperwork. Or fetch coffee." Victor chuckled. I just shrugged. If she needs coffee, she knows where to find me. They laughed, thinking I was making fun of myself. Perfect. Let them believe it. Let them think I was a nobody. Let them think I was the weakest person in the room. Let them think firing me, which they were already planning, would be easy. Everything Charles had taught me was leaning on that one simple truth. Power is loud. Control is silent. And silence terrifies people when it breaks. Tonight, I was silent. Tonight, I played the harmless husband. Tonight, I was exactly what they thought I was. And exactly what Charles needed me to be. Chapter 4, The Firing. Friday mornings at Montgomery Industries were usually predictable. Quiet hallways, half-empty offices, and the hum of coffee machines competing with exhausted employees. But that morning, the air felt heavier, thick with the kind of artificial calm that only appears right before something unpleasant. At 9:02 a.m., my work phone buzzed. "Mr. Ward, the board would like to see you in the main conference room." The assistant's voice was stiff, rehearsed. She didn't sound confused. She sounded nervous. "On my way," I said. I closed the report I'd been working on, not that it mattered anymore, and walked toward the boardroom. Employees watched me with a kind of hushed sympathy, like they already knew what was coming and didn't want to be caught staring. The large double doors were already open. Victor, Bryce, Margaret, Gerald, and the rest of the board sat around the 30-foot polished table like judges waiting to deliver a verdict. And Elena? Nowhere. Of course. Victor gestured to the single empty chair placed at the far end of the table. Isolated, intentional. "Lucas," he said with a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for joining us this morning." I nodded politely. "Always a pleasure." He exchanged a glance with Bryce, who grinned like this was Christmas morning. Victor folded his hands. "I'll be direct. After reviewing departmental structure and assessing future organizational needs, the board has reached a unanimous decision regarding your role." I almost laughed at how dramatically he paused, like he was unveiling a national secret. Bryce leaned in, eager. Margaret avoided my eyes. Gerald looked like he wished he were anywhere else. Victor continued, voice smooth as oiled steel. "Effective immediately, your position will be terminated due to internal restructuring." There it was, the hit, delivered with corporate precision and a sprinkle of buzzword garnish. I let a slow breath leave my chest. Then I smiled. Not forced, not bitter, not wounded, just calm. "Is that so?" I said pleasantly. A flicker crossed Victor's face, confusion, irritation, maybe both. He clearly expected a reaction, an outburst, anger, pleading. Something. Bryce jumped in eagerly. This wasn't personal, buddy, he said, trying to sound sympathetic and failing. It's just, high-level recalibration for operational efficiency. I raised an eyebrow. Operational efficiency? He nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. I see. Gerald cleared his throat. Lucas, I want you to know this decision wasn't made lightly. Of course it wasn't, I said warmly. These things take time. Victor clasped his hands tighter. You'll receive the standard severance package. HR will collect your badge and escort you out of the building. Escort? I chuckled softly. That won't be necessary. I know the way. Bryce blinked. You're taking this well. Well, I repeated lightly. I'd say I'm taking it appropriately. Margaret finally looked at me. Her eyes weren't cruel, just resigned. Elena was informed, she said quietly. She agreed with the board's consensus. I nodded slowly. Of course she agreed. Why wouldn't she? She'd been waiting her whole life to stand beside the board, to be taken seriously, to be seen as the heir Charles supposedly wanted. If sacrificing her husband was the entry fee, she didn't even hesitate. Victor cleared his throat, annoyed by my steady expression. We expected you might have questions, he said. I don't, I replied. Bryce leaned back. No protest? No attempt to negotiate? Nothing. I shrugged. What would I negotiate for? Victor leaned forward. Your job. Oh, I said with a small shrug. No, thank you. They stared. I stood slowly, smoothing my shirt cuffs, and glanced around the table. Thank you all, I said sincerely. Bryce blinked. For what? For the opportunity, I replied. It's been educational. Victor frowned. Educational? Very, I said. Truly, the silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was uncomfortable. Like the room itself sensed something they didn't. They had expected a collapse, a meltdown, maybe even a desperate appeal to Elena. Instead, I was calm. Too calm. Victor's brow creased. Lucas, are you sure you understand the seriousness of this decision? Completely. You're not concerned? I smiled softly. Not in the slightest. That was when the first real crack of uncertainty spread through the room. Because they had no idea. No idea what Charles had done. No idea what documents were locked away in his private vault. No idea whose name was written on over 71% of Montgomery Industries shares. And they had just fired that man. I picked up my badge, placed it gently on the table, and nodded politely at each board member. Victor, I said. Margaret. Gerald. Bryce. Then I let my gaze linger on Bryce a beat longer. Good luck, I said quietly, with the restructuring. Bryce frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Oh, I'm sure you'll figure it out eventually. Victor stood, clearly disliking the way this conversation felt like I was dismissing them. Security will... I held up a hand gently. Please, I can walk myself out. He hesitated. Very well. I turned toward the door. As I reached it, Bryce called out behind me. Lucas. I paused, looking back over my shoulder. You're not going to complain? Fight? Appeal? I grinned. Why would I fight the board for firing me, when the board just fired the majority owner of the company? They all froze. Their faces shifted from smug satisfaction to creeping confusion. What? Bryce whispered, but I didn't elaborate. I didn't turn back. I simply pushed open the door, stepped into the hallway, and walked out. Calm, steady, almost serene, because the truth was simple. They had no idea what they'd just done. Chapter 5, The Quiet Weekend. The elevator ride down from the boardroom to the lobby felt strangely peaceful. Not triumphant, not bitter, just quiet, like the universe had just hit a reset button I'd been waiting years to press. I walked out of Montgomery Industries without looking back. No security escort, no dramatics, no panic, just a man strolling to his car as if he hadn't just been fired by the most clueless collection of executives in corporate history. When I reached home, the silence of the house wrapped around me like a familiar friend. Elena was still at the office, no doubt soaking up the board's approval and flashing her new CEO smile for whatever photographers happened to be lurking nearby. Fine by me. I went straight to my study, shut the door, knelt by the old walnut bookshelf, and pressed my thumb against the biometric lock hidden beneath the second shelf. A soft click. The panel slid open. Behind it, a steel safe, Charles's safe, originally his, then gifted to me with a simple sentence. One day, this will matter. I keyed in the code he'd made me memorize. The safe unlocked. Inside lay a black folder wrapped in a leather band. The Montgomery Industries crest embossed in gold. The air inside the safe smelled faintly of old paper and the cologne Charles used to wear. I carried the folder to my desk, sat down, and opened it. There they were, all notarized, all witnessed, all signed documents confirming the transfer of 71% ownership to me. Stock certificates, succession clauses, Charles's handwritten letter stating intentions in brutal clarity. Everything airtight, everything final, everything legally mine. My phone buzzed. Maya Chun. Of course, she'd call the moment she saw the timestamp on those documents. Maya never missed a legal tremor. If it registered on a corporate Richter scale, she felt it before the ground moved. I answered. Maya. Lucas, she said in her controlled, razor-sharp voice. I assume you've reviewed everything? Yes. And it's perfect, I said. Exactly the way Charles promised. She exhaled a small, satisfied breath. Good. I triple-checked last night. No loopholes. No vulnerabilities. If the board tries to contest, we'll bury them in so much precedent they'll suffocate. I chuckled. You always know how to make a man feel legally invincible. It's not flattery, she said dryly. It's math. And in this equation, you own everything. They just don't know it yet. I leaned back in my chair. They fired me this morning. I know. Of course she did. Maya always knew. You gonna flip the table? She asked. Not yet. Good, she said. Let them bury themselves deeper. The deeper they dig, the easier it is to collapse the tunnel on top of them. That sounds violent. That's corporate law. I smiled. Thanks, Maya. Enjoy your weekend, Lucas. Monday will be entertaining. After the call, I put all the documents back into the safe, locked it, and made myself a cup of coffee. A light roast, smooth, Charles's favorite. I sat on the back porch and sipped it while birds chirped in the trees. And that was how my post-firing weekend began. By Saturday morning, the rumors started. Not inside the company. Rumors inside Montgomery Industries didn't stay contained. They grew legs, arms, and a subscription to a gym. The first text arrived from an old coworker. Heard you had a meltdown? You okay, man? I laughed aloud. A meltdown? Please. I've been calmer than the Dalai Lama on sleeping pills. Then came the next rumor. Dude, I heard you and Elena argued in the parking garage. Like shouting? The next one. You threw a laptop at Victor? Is that true? And then the most dramatic. Someone said you cried in the hallway real bad. Cried? In the hallway? The board had truly lost its mind if they thought fabricating emotional breakdowns would make them look strong. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I grilled steaks. Literally. Saturday afternoon, I had a full barbecue going, ribs, corn, garlic bread. I put on sunglasses, turned on the Formula One race, and lounged like a man who'd taken a surprise vacation. When the commentators announced a surprise overtake on turn 9, I raised my beer in salute. If someone had peeked into my backyard, they'd never guess I'd been terminated from a Fortune 500 company less than 48 hours earlier. My phone buzzed again. Maya this time, encrypted message. Intel drop. Read carefully. I opened it. 1. Board attempting to liquidate Anderson Manufacturing. 2. This will piss off investor Victoria Hale. Deeply. 3. Also considering selling NeuralSync, the AI startup Charles poured millions into. I read it twice, then shook my head. Of course they were doing exactly what Charles predicted. Selling the profitable subsidiary to cover their incompetence. Angering one of their most dangerous investors, Victoria Hale, a woman whose scorched earth tactics made Maya look gentle. And sacrificing NeuralSync, Charles's passion project, the one he believed would redefine the next decade. I leaned back in my chair and laughed. A long, genuine laugh. The kind Charles used to let out when he described the board as a committee of raccoons wearing business suits. They were doing it. They were burying themselves. Exactly, perfectly, beautifully, just as Charles said they would. Chapter 6, Sunday night. The clown calls. By Sunday evening, The sky outside my study window had turned a deep violet, the kind that makes the whole neighborhood look like it's submerged underwater. I just finished sorting the final stack of documents I intended to carry into the boardroom Monday morning. Copies of the succession filings, the notarized letters, the controlling interest certificates, and the legal clarifications Maya had highlighted for dramatic effect. Everything was lined up in a neat row on my desk. Clean, precise, ready. I poured myself a glass of bourbon and had barely taken the first sip when my phone lit up. Bryce, of all people. I stared at the screen for a moment, amused. The universe really had a sense of humor. I answered, voice calm. Bryce. There was a sloppy burst of static, and then his nasally voice oozed through the speaker. The Lucas, my man. How are you holding up? Been a rough week for you, huh? I smiled into my glass. The man couldn't hide his smirk, even through a phone line. I'm doing well, I said. He clicked his tongue sympathetically, dripping fake warmth. Yeah, of course you say that. But listen, between us, buddy, what happened on Friday? You really lost it like they said? Heard you walked out without your badge, without your stuff, without even trying to talk to Elena. I said nothing. The silence threw him off. Anyway, he continued, clearing his throat, I just wanted to call because, well, I know how hard it is out there. Jobs are tough to find, especially for someone like you. Someone like me? I asked. Yeah, someone who was never exactly management material. He let out a wheezy laugh, proud of himself. I took another sip of bourbon. Then he went in for the kill. So look, I talked to Victor, and Elena, and the board, and you'll be happy to know there might be an opening for you. I said. He exhaled grandly, like he was performing a miracle. Yeah, entry level. Very entry level. Basic admin stuff. Filing, printing, maybe some spreadsheet cleanup. Nothing too advanced. He softened his tone, pretending kindness. But hey, it's a start. Something to get you back on your feet. I could practically hear him grinning. And between us, if you want it, you should probably, show a little humility. Tell them you're sorry. Maybe apologize for how you, left the building. I almost choked on my bourbon from the sheer stupidity of it. Oh, I said, and would this role report directly to you? Oh, naturally, he said. I mean, I'd supervise your tasks. Make sure you stay on track. Of course, I murmured. He misread my tone as defeat. Look, Lucas, he said, leaning in like a mentor. You don't want to make enemies in corporate life. You got to know your place. You're a good guy, a background guy. Not everyone's meant to lead. There it was. His core belief, spoken with pure sincerity, that he was above me. I set my bourbon down and switched gears. Well, Bryce, I said pleasantly, before I embarrassed myself by begging for such a prestigious opportunity, I do have one question. Shoot, you mentioned the board's plan to liquidate a few assets. He stiffened. Yeah, maybe. What? I was reviewing some numbers, I said casually. Have you considered the EBITDA variance on Anderson Manufacturing? Because their last quarterly filings showed a significant uptick in year-over-year retained earnings, and selling at this point might trigger a negative leverage cycle. Silence. Total silence. I continued gently. See, when an asset's projected PE ratio is below market volatility thresholds, it's usually smarter to hold. Otherwise, you compromise long-term shareholder value. Bryce made a faint choking noise. The what ratio? The PE ratio, I repeated. Price to earnings. Right, he said hastily. Yeah, of course. I know that. Obviously. Everyone knows whatever that is. I kept going. In neural sync, if you divest too fast, you're going to collapse their R&D pipeline. You'll trigger a runoff of their top engineers. Not to mention violating 2 of the forward merger covenants Charles embedded before he... Wait, Bryce sputtered. Why are you talking like that? What are you even saying? I'm asking if you understand the financial consequences of what you're planning. I do understand, he snapped. That's board stuff, okay? Big picture stuff. His voice tightened defensively. Your job, if you want one, is just doing whatever tasks we assign. Oh, I said lightly. Of course. He relaxed immediately, misreading everything. Exactly, he said. See, this is why I want to call you personally. I'm a compassionate guy, Lucas. I look out for you little people. Not everyone on the board would. I savor the moment. You little people. I'm sure you do, Bryce. Good, he said, feeling victorious. So just think it over. And Monday morning, if you want the job, come by my office. Early, before anyone sees you, before anyone sees me. He wanted humiliation. Public, quiet, discreet humiliation. I'll consider it, I said. Great, great. And hey, chin up, buddy. Not everyone is cut out for the corporate world. But I'm rooting for you. He hung up proud of himself, absolutely convinced he'd put Lucas in his place. I set the phone down, leaned back, and let out a long breath, not of exhaustion, but of disbelief, a kind of amazed amusement. He had no idea, not one. They were walking straight into a hurricane and smiling. I finished my bourbon, turned back to my desk, and stacked the documents neatly into the leather portfolio I'd carry the next morning. Then I whispered to myself, Monday it is. Chapter 7, Monday morning. The return. The sky over downtown Chicago was a cold, metallic gray when I stepped out of my car in the Montgomery Industries parking garage. The air smelled like rain and steel, fitting for the kind of morning that changes the trajectory of an entire corporation. I straightened my tie, grabbed the leather portfolio containing the documents that would detonate the boardroom, and walked toward the building. Before I even swiped my badge, HR Director Donna Michaels appeared beside me with a nervous smile. Lucas, she said quietly, the board asked that I escort you upstairs. Of course, I replied smoothly. Lead the way. If she expected me to protest or demand explanations, she didn't show it. Maybe she just assumed I was here to beg for my job back. If only she knew. We stepped into the elevator, and Donna swallowed hard. They, didn't tell me what this is about. That makes two of us, I said lightly. Her shoulders relaxed. She believed the lie easily. The elevator dinged as we reached the executive floor. The door slid open to reveal Margaret Shunn standing outside the boardroom with her arms crossed, expression sharp as a scalpel. She saw me. Her eyebrows lifted just a fraction. Not surprise. Recognition. Like she'd been waiting. Morning, Lucas, she said. Morning, Margaret. Donna cleared her throat. I'll just let them know he's here. She slipped inside. Margaret leaned toward me slightly. You're calm. That's fun. I try, I replied. Inside the boardroom, muffled voices bickered behind the heavy oak doors. Victor's low growl. Bryce's nasal muttering. Papers shuffling. Chairs scraping. The usual chaos of incompetent men pretending to run a company. Donna poked her head out. They're ready. The double doors opened. I walked in. Every conversation died instantly. Victor stood at the head of the long marble table, face tight. Bryce sat hunched in his seat, pale already. Gerald Foster dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief. Margaret took her place silently, watching the circus begin. Victor's voice cracked like a whip. Lucas, why are you here? I set my leather portfolio on the polished table, slow and deliberate. Because, I said, I believe we have business to discuss. This is highly irregular, Victor snapped. You were terminated. You no longer have clearance to be in this room. Correct, I said, as an employee. He blinked at that particular emphasis. Before he could reply, Bryce chimed in with a shaky, forced laugh. Listen, Lucas, buddy, this isn't necessary. If you're here about the little job offer I mentioned, we can talk about it. Sit down, Bryce, Margaret said without looking at him. He froze. I unbuckled the leather band on the portfolio and slid out the first stack of documents, clean, crisp, legal armor forged by Charles and Maya both. I placed them in the center of the table. This, I said, tapping the top sheet, is why I'm here. Victor reached for the papers with a scoff. Then his eyes hit the first line. He stopped breathing. What is this? He rasped. Documentation, I said evenly, confirming the transfer of 71% controlling ownership of Montgomery Industries to me, executed by Charles Montgomery himself. Silence slammed into the room. Bryce's mouth fell open. S71%? Gerald took off his glasses, stared at the papers, and whispered, Good God. Victor turned 5 shades of red, flipping through pages with shaking hands. This is forged. This must be forged. Margaret finally laughed, softly, wickedly. Victor, if these were forged, Maya Chun would already have your heart in a mason jar. Bryce staggered to his feet. No, no, this can't be real. Charles would never give this idiot. He did, I said simply. Years ago. Ironclad. Notarized. Witnessed. Filed. Bryce swayed like a drunk man. I need water. Gerald stood up, walked to the window, stared out at the skyline, and let out a single sigh of relief that echoed like a man freed from prison. Tell my wife, he said quietly. I'll go with her to Tuscany after all. Victor slammed his hand on the table. Sit down, Gerald. No, Gerald said, picking up his coat. I believe I'm done here. And he walked right out of the boardroom. Victor pointed at me like a man drowning. You blindsided us. How dare you? How dare Charles? Before the meltdown could hit full speed, the conference phone lit up. A sharp ringtone cut through the chaos. Incoming call. Victoria Hale. Hale Capital Partners. Every remaining board member froze. Victor swallowed. Hard. And no, not her. Margaret muttered under her breath. Showtime. Victor scrambled to compose his voice and hit the speaker button. Victoria. What a surprise. We weren't expecting. Her voice thundered through the speaker, cool and lethal. Victor, why am I hearing rumors that you idiots are liquidating Anderson Manufacturing without notifying me? Bryce whimpered. Victor tried to speak. We were just evaluating. Be quiet. I'm not talking to you, she snapped. The room went still. Put Lucas on the line, she said. Victor's jaw dropped. Why? Why would she? I stepped forward and pressed the button. I'm here, Victoria. Her voice softened instantly. Good. Tell me who is actually running this company right now. I glanced around the room. The panic, the sweat, the fury. I am, I said. Effective immediately. Victor slammed his fist. He cannot declare that. Victoria cut him off. If Lucas says he is in charge, then he is. Margaret, are you CFO or not? Margaret smirked, eyes glittering. I am. Good, Victoria said. Lucas, consider this my official stance. If anyone other than you holds operational control, I'm pulling all my investments and I will short Montgomery Industries so brutally your stock price will cry. Bryce let out a faint squeak. Victor slumped back in his chair like someone had cut his strings. Victoria continued. Now clean up this disaster. And Lucas, call me in an hour. The line went dead. The boardroom was silent. Completely, utterly, beautifully silent. And I stood there at the center of it. Calm. Steady. Exactly where Charles always intended me to stand. Chapter 8. The takeover begins. The moment Lucas stepped into his new office, formerly Charles Montgomery's corner office overlooking the river, he didn't sit, didn't breathe, didn't admire the view. He turned to Margaret Shunn, who had followed him in, still half-shocked and half-amused by the nuclear-level meltdown that had happened in the boardroom. Margaret, Lucas said calmly, bring Bryce in. Her eyebrows twitched upward. You're doing it already? Immediately, he replied, straightening the stack of documents on his desk. Before he has time to spin anything, hide anything, or bribe anyone. Margaret nodded once, almost relieved. With pleasure. She disappeared, and less than a minute later, Bryce stumbled into the office. The man looked like he had run a marathon through a hurricane, hair frizzed, shirt untucked, eyes bloodshot with panic. Lucas, Mr. Ward, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Lucas motioned to the chair with 2 fingers, an almost bored gesture. Sit. Bryce sat so quickly he nearly missed the seat. Lucas didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He didn't even sound angry. Bryce, he said, sliding a single envelope across the desk, you're fired. Bryce blinked. What? No theatrics, Lucas continued. No rebuttals. Your termination is effective immediately. Security will escort you out. HR will handle your severance. Bryce sputtered. You can't just... I've been on this board for 23 years. And during those 23 years, Lucas replied, you've cost this company 18 potential acquisitions for major partnerships and God knows how many opportunities because you were too busy flirting with interns and approving bonus packages for your golf buddies. Bryce's jaw dropped. Lucas continued in the same even tone. You are incompetent, ethically compromised, and a walking PR disaster. You're done. Margaret opened the door. 2 security guards waited behind her. Bryce turned red, then purple. This isn't over. You'll regret. No, Lucas said. I won't. The guards took Bryce by the elbows gently, but firmly. His voice echoed down the hall as he was dragged out. This is a mistake. You'll be nothing without. The door shut. Margaret exhaled, smiling a little. That felt therapeutic. Lucas finally Saturday one down. 20 more to deal with. She nodded. What's next? Everything. Lucas began with the cancer at the root of the board's financial decay. First, he said, pulling up the company's project list on a massive wall screen. Cancel the sale of Anderson Manufacturing. Margaret blinked. Officially, immediately. She typed swiftly, already drafting cancellation notices. The board will explode. Good, Lucas said. Let them. He tapped the next item. Same for Neural Sync. That one's more serious, Margaret warned. Victor pushed the sale aggressively. Bryce backed it. Selling Neural Sync would have gutted our entire AI division. Exactly why it stays with us. She typed again. Lucas folded his hands behind his back. Every asset Charles fought to build stays where it belongs. Margaret paused. Charles really trusted you, didn't he? Lucas didn't answer. The memories of late-night conversations in Charles's old study flashed through his mind. Whiskey in hand, an empire on the line. Next, he said, clearing his throat, issue an official freeze on all executive bonuses. Margaret stared at him. They will riot. Let them. Anyone who panics is someone I want gone. She smiled faintly. You're sounding more like Charles by the minute. Lucas paced the office slowly, methodically, in order a full multi-year financial audit of every department with external investigators. No internal whitewashing. Margaret typed faster now. Audit covering past 3 years? 5. 10. She froze mid-keystroke. 10. Lucas. That will uncover every skeleton in every closet. Exactly. She shook her head in disbelief, but continued typing. You're really doing this. Lucas stopped at the window, looking down at the city, through Charles's eyes, through the eyes of a man who had been underestimated for far too long. They fire me on Friday, he said quietly. A man holding 71% of the company. A man who could buy and sell every one of them 10 times over. Margaret nodded slowly. They thought you were harmless. Good. Lucas turned. Let them keep thinking that. By noon, word had spread through all 38 floors. The fire guy is the owner. He owns the entire company. Bryce is gone. For good. Rumors pulsed through hallways like electricity. Did you see Victor's face? They say Lucas walked in with legal documents thicker than a phone book. I heard Margaret nearly passed out laughing. Bryce cried, like actual tears. Every department had its own embellished version, but they all agreed on one thing. Lucas Ward was suddenly the most powerful man in the building, and he was cleaning house. HR called to report that several executives were concerned about the bonus freeze. Let them be concerned, Lucas said, signing another order. If they're shaking, they're guilty. He barely finished when Margaret's phone buzzed violently. She looked at the screen. Media, she whispered. All of them. Lucas lifted an eyebrow. Already, you're trending online. He snorted. For what? She turned her phone to him. Hashtag owner ward. Hashtag 71% king. Hashtag the return of Lucas. Hashtag fired to founder. If this keeps going, Margaret said, there will be reporters swarming the building. As if on cue, her email pinged. Too late, she whispered. They're already outside. Lucas stepped toward the window. Below, a sea of cameras, vans, reporters, microphones, drones, and flashing lights formed a thick cluster at the building's entrance. It's a circus, Margaret said. He looked down calmly. Good, Lucas said. Let them watch. He turned away from the window, walked toward the conference table, and placed his hands on the polished surface. This is only the beginning, he said, and he meant it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Charles had built a dynasty. The board had almost destroyed it. And now Lucas, quiet, underestimated, dismissed, was rebuilding it from the bones outward. Not someday, not gradually. Now, he took a breath, straightened his tie, and looked at Margaret. Prepare the afternoon agenda, he said. The takeover begins today. And the building buzzed with fear, curiosity, and chaos as Lucas Ward stepped into the role he had been destined for. Chapter 9, Elena Breaks. By mid-afternoon, the adrenaline from the morning's chaos was beginning to settle like a fine layer of dust over the office. I had walked the halls, spoken to staff, checked in with Margaret, and reviewed the latest headlines. Flashing lights, cameras, social media notifications exploding with hashtag Lucas Ward owns 71%, and an endless stream of emails from investors, lawyers, and curious journalists. Then my phone rang. The caller ID flashed one name in bold red. Elena Ward. I knew the call was coming. I just didn't expect it to arrive this quickly. I took a slow breath and answered. Elena. Lucas, she shrieked, the sound of her voice sharp, raw, and panicked. What the hell do you think you're doing? You've humiliated me. Humiliated me in front of the board, in front of the media, in front of everyone. How could you? Her words hit like slaps, but I didn't flinch. I had already seen this performance once before, on social media, in board meetings, and in the mirror of her own vanity. Calm down, I said evenly. We need to speak rationally. Rationally? She barked. You just waltzed in, threw your weight around, fired Bryce, froze bonuses, canceled every single one of my plans. Do you even understand what you've done to me? To us. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded over the stack of documents I had been reviewing. Elena, listen carefully. The board didn't humiliate you. You humiliated yourself. What? How dare you? Stop. I interrupted gently. Just listen for a moment. You allowed the board to manipulate you. You were focused on optics, Instagram posts, hashtags, press photos. You didn't understand the company you supposedly ran. And you fired your own husband without knowing a single thing about the stakes involved. There was a pause on the line. I could hear her breathing, sharp, uneven, desperate. You're saying it was my fault? She hissed. You're telling me this is my fault? After everything I've done for this family? For you? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let the quiet stretch long enough for her words to hang in the air. The weight of them, the absurdity of her pride, and the fragile illusion she had maintained, it all simmered between us. Partly, I just said finally, calm as ever. But more than that, it's not about blame. It's about reality. You cared about appearances. You cared about being seen. And in doing so, you ignored what truly mattered. The company, the family, and me. She gasped, almost inaudibly. You, how could you speak to me like this? After everything, I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I only spoke the truth, the quiet, cold, undeniable truth. You chose the board over me, Elena. You chose Instagram over understanding. You chose hashtags over the foundation your father built. You humiliated yourself long before anyone else had the chance. There was silence. Long, thick, crushing. I can't believe this, she whispered finally, voice trembling. You're cruel. You don't care about anyone but yourself. I leaned back in my chair, letting her words roll over me like water off steel. I do care. I care enough to let the world see exactly what's happening. I care enough to act when others refuse to. I care enough to preserve the legacy Charles built, not Instagram likes and PR stunts. Her voice rose again, pitched high with rage and heartbreak. You've destroyed everything. You've destroyed me. I trusted you. I thought. I held up a hand, not in surrender, but in quiet insistence. Elena, I'm not going to argue with you anymore. The facts are clear, and the decisions have been made. The rest is between you and yourself. She was silent this time, only the sound of her shaky breathing filling the line. I could imagine her standing in the middle of her pristine office, heels clicking against the marble, arms crossed, fury and panic warring on her face. I need to think, she finally said, barely above a whisper. Yes, I replied softly. Think, and maybe, for once, see things as they really are instead of how you want them to appear. She hung up without another word. I set the phone down and exhaled slowly, the tension in my shoulders beginning to release. It wasn't relief. Not yet. This was something heavier, a recognition that something fundamental had shifted. The marriage I had known, the partnership I had assumed existed, had just taken its first visible, irreversible fracture. I didn't try to call her back. I didn't send texts, emails, or messages. Silence was the only response that mattered now. Because no argument, no explanation, no rationalization could fix what had been broken. And sometimes, the final act isn't screaming, fighting, or trying to convince the other person. Sometimes, the final act is simply silence, letting the truth settle, letting the world, and those involved, face reality as it is, not as they wish it to be. I poured another glass of bourbon, took a slow sip, and looked out at the city skyline. The office was still alive with staff checking emails, preparing reports, and buzzing about the morning's upheaval, but none of it touched me. The decisions, the takeovers, the legacy, they would carry on. But Elena? That was a different story. A story that, for the first time, felt like it might not include us. And for the first time, I let the silence speak louder than any argument ever could. Chapter 10, Court Day. Tuesday morning arrived with a chill in the air that felt almost judicial, crisp, and unyielding, like the marble floors of the courthouse itself. I drove downtown in silence, my portfolio resting on the passenger seat, packed with every legal document, notarized certificate, and deposition Charles and Maya had prepared. Margaret sat beside me, her expression unreadable but alert, eyes scanning every pedestrian and car outside as if she could sense corporate sabotage waiting in the air. "You ready for this?" she asked quietly. I exhaled, keeping my tone calm, as ready as anyone can be when you know the truth, and they refuse to see it. She nodded. "Maya's going to have them begging for mercy." I chuckled softly. Mercy isn't her style. She'll make sure they crumble. By the time we entered the courtroom, the room was already buzzing with anticipation. The board members, led by Victor and Bryce, sat in rigid leather chairs, all attempting to project authority despite the tremor in their hands and the sweat on their brows. I could see the fake confidence painted across their faces, the last desperate attempt to convince the world they still controlled something. Bryce caught my eye and gave a weak smile that looked more like a grimace. Victor's stare could have carved marble. Gerald Foster had wisely retired from the drama weeks ago, but the rest of the board looked like men who had just been dropped from an airplane without a parachute. At the front of the room, Maya Chun was setting up her files, calm, meticulous, deadly. I watched her for a moment, remembering the way she had handled every boardroom crisis with precision and quiet force. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She simply prepared facts that could annihilate even the most arrogant corporate egos. The judge entered, an elderly man with sharp eyes that seemed to see through veneers, pretenses, and lies alike. Papers shuffled, gavel struck, and proceedings began. Victor's attorney stood first, speaking in rapid-fire corporate legalese. "Your Honor, we challenge the validity of Mr. Ward's claimed controlling stake. We contend that Mr. Montgomery, prior to his passing, was mentally unfit to execute such transfers. The documents presented, while appearing legal, do not represent his true intent." The room shifted. Murmurs erupted from the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously. The board exchanged nervous glances. Maya rose with her characteristic precision. "Your Honor," she said, voice smooth but imbued with authority, "we will demonstrate that Charles Montgomery was fully competent and deliberate in his decisions regarding the succession of Montgomery Industries. Our evidence is comprehensive, verifiable, and irrefutable." Victor's attorney smirked. "Comprehensive? Yes, but—" Maya cut him off with a glance sharp enough to freeze a man in mid-sentence. "Your Honor, the first item, certified medical records confirming Charles Montgomery was in excellent cognitive and physical health at all times surrounding the execution of these documents." She handed the records to the clerk, who passed them to the judge. "Second," Maya continued, "our sworn statement from multiple licensed physicians who treated Mr. Montgomery personally. Each confirms he was of sound mind, fully aware of his decisions, and capable of making high-level corporate judgments." Victor's jaw tightened. Bryce shifted in his seat, chewing nervously on the inside of his cheek. "Third," Maya said, "notarized recordings of Mr. Montgomery discussing the succession plan, his rationale, and his expectations for the company. Each recording time-stamped, each notarized, and each indisputable. Bryce whispered something to Victor. This can't be legit. It is, I said softly, almost to myself. Finally, Maya said, pulling a small tablet from her briefcase. We present visual evidence of Mr. Montgomery solving a genius-level Sudoku puzzle in 8 minutes. Filmed, notarized, and verified for authenticity. A challenge requiring focus, intelligence, and strategic foresight. The timing and accuracy demonstrate beyond doubt his mental acuity. She tapped the play button. The video projected onto the screen. Charles Montgomery's hands moved confidently over the puzzle, eyes scanning numbers, solving complex sequences with precision. 8 minutes. Not a single error. Calm, composed, brilliant. The courtroom was silent. Victor's face drained of color. Bryce practically melted into his chair. Even the gallery leaned forward in awe. Maya's voice cut through the stunned silence. Your Honor, the claim that Mr. Montgomery was mentally unfit is not only unfounded, it is preposterous. Every document, every notarized file, every recorded action proves that he acted deliberately, legally, and with full knowledge of the consequences. The board attorney sputtered, searching for words, but they failed him. Maya turned to me. Mr. Ward, would you like to make a statement? I stood slowly, feeling the weight of everything Charles had built, everything that had been entrusted to me. I spoke clearly, calmly. Your Honor, Montgomery Industries is my family's legacy. My father-in-law trusted me to continue his work. These documents, these records, and the evidence before you are the culmination of his foresight. The board's attempt to challenge this ownership is not only baseless, it undermines the very integrity of our corporate governance. The judge reviewed the documents, glanced at the screen, then leaned back. He tapped his gavel. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, he said slowly, deliberately, this court finds in favor of Lucas Ward. The transfer of 71% controlling ownership to Mr. Ward is valid and enforceable. Montgomery Industries is under his control, effective immediately. A collective groan erupted from aboard. Bryce's face twisted in disbelief. Victor slammed his fist onto the bench. Margaret exhaled quietly, trying not to smile. Maya gave me a small nod, calm, professional, victorious. I allowed myself a tiny smile. The weight of months of planning, of patience, of quiet observation, finally bore fruit. The courtroom murmurs grew louder. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed, and the board sat there, shattered, humiliated, and exposed. The legal battle was over. The ownership was mine. The board had lost catastrophically. And I, Lucas Ward, was finally in full control of Montgomery Industries, with nothing standing in my way but the work ahead. Chapter 11. Full Consolidation. The boardroom was quiet, eerily quiet, when I walked in that morning. The sunlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off the polished mahogany table like a spotlight on a stage set for judgment. The atmosphere was heavy, almost suffocating. Board members who had been bold just a week ago now shifted nervously in their seats. Papers shuffled in trembling hands, and eyes darted toward the door as if I might vanish or explode at any moment. Margaret walked beside me, her expression calm but alert. "They're scared," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "They should be," I replied evenly. "They've had time to realize they're no longer in control." Victor sat rigid at the head of the table, the faint sheen of perspiration on his forehead betraying his composure. Bryce, of course, was nowhere to be seen. His permanent removal was already processed, a lesson in subtle but irreversible power. The rest of the board shuffled uncomfortably, some avoiding eye contact, others glancing at Margaret for reassurance. "Good morning," I said, letting the words roll over the room like a calm wave of inevitability. "Please sit." Some hesitated. Victor's fingers drummed against the tabletop nervously. "Lucas, may we know the purpose of this meeting?" I smiled faintly, deliberately. "The purpose is simple: consolidation, clarification, and correction." I placed a fresh folder on the table in front of each board member. We're going to ensure Montgomery Industries operates efficiently, ethically, and profitably. Starting today, Margaret cleared her throat. We've reviewed the initial audit findings. Several departments show signs of mismanagement, conflicts of interest, and outright corruption. This meeting will address the immediate structural changes required. Victor's voice rose slightly, but only in panic. You can't just fire board members without procedure. There are contracts, legal obligations. I raised a hand, calm and final. Victor, those contracts are in force, yes. But competence, integrity, and loyalty supersede titles. Effective immediately, Bryce is terminated permanently. Several other members identified as corrupt or negligent will also be removed. HR and legal have been instructed to process these changes in accordance with corporate law. Murmurs spread around the room. Some executives tried to mask their panic behind fake professionalism. Others whispered quietly to one another, attempting to gauge the shifting balance of power. Margaret leaned slightly toward me. Do you want me to announce the names now, or shall we wait for private notifications? I tapped the folder in front of me. Let's announce them. Transparency is key. Any obfuscation, any hesitation will only undermine authority. She nodded, then turned to the board. Effective immediately, Bryce is permanently removed from the board. Victor, along with other members listed here, are asked to step down due to breaches of fiduciary duty and conflicts of interest. HR and legal will facilitate your exit procedures. Any questions regarding this process should be directed to me or Mr. Ward. Victor sputtered. You can't. There are precedents, corporate norms. I'm well aware, I said, voice steady, controlled. We are creating new precedents, ones that Montgomery Industries deserves. The rest of the board had gone pale, some staring at the floor, others stiffening in their chairs. Margaret handed each of them the necessary paperwork for resignation or termination. We move forward from here, she said simply. I took a seat at the head of the table, Charles's old seat, the command center of the empire he had built. Margaret pulled a chair beside me. Now we begin long-term strategy. I looked around at the remaining members. The company has potential beyond what was realized by the previous administration. We will implement structural reforms immediately. Department heads will report to new regional directors. Ethical compliance officers will monitor all operations. Executive bonuses are frozen until performance and accountability metrics are fully established. One young board member ventured a timid question. Sir, will there be opportunities for existing staff to retain positions under the new structure? Opportunities exist, I said, for competence, integrity, and dedication. Those who fail to meet expectations or attempt to manipulate the system will not remain. Margaret opened a fresh document on the screen. We've drafted a 5-year strategic plan. It includes expansion into emerging markets, investment in AI and tech infrastructure, and risk mitigation strategies for financial volatility. All projections have been stress-tested and verified. I nodded. Margaret and I will oversee implementation directly. All major decisions will be discussed with the executive team first. Any deviation from ethical or operational standards will be addressed immediately. We will build a culture of accountability from the ground up. Victor's hand twitched. And investors, they will approve of this radical overhaul. Investors don't approve of incompetence, I said calmly. They approve of results. And the first meeting with Victoria Hale is scheduled for later today. She will hear our plan directly. Margaret gave a small, almost imperceptible smirk. She's already been briefed on the initial changes. She expects efficiency and transparency. Anything less is unacceptable. I leaned back in the chair, hands folded over the table. Everything we're doing, Margaret, is in line with Charles's vision. No shortcuts, no excuses, no political games. We rebuild, not just to restore what was lost, but to surpass it. Margaret tapped her pen against the desk. The team is nervous, but they're ready to follow competent leadership. Your calmness, it's contagious. They can feel it. I glanced around the boardroom at the remaining members. They looked defeated, uncertain, and finally aware of who held the power. That awareness alone was half the battle. Margaret leaned closer. Victoria's call will be critical. We need to present a unified front, demonstrate our strategy, and reassure her that Montgomery Industries is in capable hands. I nodded. Exactly. She must see the precision, the accountability, and the vision. If she's convinced, the rest of the world will follow. A secretary entered with a fresh set of prints and briefed us on timeline. Everything was coordinated. Every document, every slide, every talking point had been double-checked. I looked out the window at the city, the river glinting in the morning sun. For the first time in months, the weight of uncertainty lifted. The pieces were in place, the board partially cleansed, the structure ready to be rebuilt. Margaret straightened her blazer and gave a slight nod. Everything is set for Victoria. She'll expect us to impress, and we will. I returned the nod. Good. Let's make sure today sets the tone for the next decade. The board members shifted uneasily in their seats, fully aware that the old order was gone. I leaned forward, fingers steepled on the table. Montgomery Industries is no longer a place for mediocrity, corruption, or indecision. We are consolidating control, redefining accountability, and setting the course for the future. Everyone remaining will either follow or step aside. Silence filled the room, heavy, charged, and absolute. Margaret whispered beside me, almost to herself, "Ready for Victoria?" I smiled faintly, cold and confident. Always. Chapter 12, The Investor Meeting. The conference room at Hale Capital Partners was minimalist, austere, and intimidating in the way only a room designed for billionaires could be. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooked the Chicago River, reflecting the pale morning light across the polished concrete floor. A single, elongated table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. Victoria Hale entered precisely at 9 a.m., her presence as sharp and commanding as the reputation that preceded her. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, her hair pulled back in a sleek, no-nonsense bun. Even from across the room, it was clear she was a woman who measured value in competence, clarity, and results, and had zero tolerance for theatrics or weakness. I rose to greet her. "Ms. Hale, thank you for taking the time to meet today." She extended a hand, and I shook it firmly. Her grip was strong, unyielding, like a silent assessment of power in itself. "Lucas Ward, I've been briefed extensively. Shall we sit?" We took our seats at opposite ends of the table, a calculated distance that forced clarity and focus. Margaret remained to my left, her presence a quiet but undeniable reminder of both operational skill and moral authority. Victoria's assistant hovered discreetly nearby, ready to take notes or pass along information, but otherwise invisible. Victoria leaned forward slightly, placing her hands on the table. "Lucas, let me be blunt. I've watched the situation with Montgomery Industries closely over the past week. Your actions, swift, decisive, and unapologetic, have caught my attention. I respect competence when I see it." "Thank you," I said evenly, allowing neither pride nor arrogance to surface in my tone. "I respect your position, and I'm fully aware of what's at stake for both of us." She nodded once, sharply. "My firm holds 18% of Montgomery Industries. That stake is substantial, and my patience limited. Let me make my stance clear. If you remain in operational control, I will fully support your vision. Resources, guidance, and alignment with our strategic interests are all yours. But," she paused, eyes narrowing slightly, "if the old board ever regains control, I will pull out entirely and short the company aggressively. I have no interest in financing incompetence." I considered her words carefully. This was more than a warning. It was a contract of trust, a binding acknowledgement that the weight of her capital would hinge on my ability to lead. "Understood. You have my word that all actions will be deliberate, transparent, and aimed at long-term growth. The previous board's errors will not be repeated." Victoria raised an eyebrow, a subtle acknowledgement of my promise, but not yet acceptance. "Promises are easy. Execution is harder." Show me the framework you're implementing to prevent the chaos we witnessed over the past few months. Margaret took over seamlessly, opening a digital presentation on the large screen behind us. Charts, diagrams, and projections filled the room, audited performance metrics, proposed restructuring of executive and regional leadership, risk assessments, and a 5-year strategic growth plan. This, Margaret explained, is our roadmap. Every department has been reviewed, corrupt or negligent members removed, executive compensation aligned with performance metrics, ethical and operational oversight established, and capital allocation follows strict, verifiable parameters, ensuring both profitability and compliance. Victoria's eyes scanned each slide with precise scrutiny. Impressive. Thorough. You're not just reacting, you're restructuring for sustainability. Exactly, I said. Montgomery Industries must be competitive, innovative, and ethically managed. The foundation Charles built is solid, but required oversight, direction, and accountability, something the old board lacked. Victoria leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. I respect that. Very few people could step in, assert authority, and maintain the delicate balance between disruption and stability. You've done that. I allowed myself the smallest of nods, careful not to appear smug. It was necessary, and it's only the beginning. With your support, we can execute the strategy fully, expand intelligently, and restore investor confidence completely. She considered this for a moment, eyes narrowing slightly in focus. Lucas, I'm offering more than capital. I'm offering strategic alignment, access to our global networks, and influence in potential acquisitions, but all under one condition. Your leadership. If you falter, if you allow incompetence to regain a foothold, my support vanishes instantly. I accept that condition, I said firmly. Competence and transparency will define every decision. I have no intention of failing, and no intention of letting the company, or your investment, be compromised. Victoria's expression softened fractionally, a subtle nod of approval. Good. I like clarity. I like discipline. I like leaders who honor the trust placed in them. Charles trusted you, and now I do too. Margaret added, our alignment ensures operational efficiency, ethical oversight, and long-term growth. All decisions will be reported, analyzed, and executed with full accountability. Victoria smiled, brief, controlled, but unmistakably approving. Excellent. I want regular updates, monthly reports, quarterly reviews, and immediate notification of any deviation from plan. If your team follows this structure, the 18% we control will be leveraged fully in your favor. I glanced at Margaret. She gave a subtle nod. Everything was in place. You'll have full transparency, Victoria, and any potential missteps will be addressed proactively. This is about long-term value creation, not short-term optics. Victoria's eyes met mine with a piercing intensity. Lucas, I've seen many executives make bold statements. Few deliver. You inspire confidence, and your actions in the past week prove you understand both risk and reward. I will back you completely with my 18% stake. But understand, failure is not an option. If the board ever regains control, or if you allow mismanagement, I will exit and short the company. No exceptions. Understood, I said. We're aligned. Montgomery Industries' future is secure, and with your support, we will reach its full potential. She extended her hand again, sealing the unspoken contract between us. Then let's move forward. I expect great things, Lucas. Don't disappoint me, or your father-in-law's legacy. I shook her hand firmly, meeting her gaze without hesitation. You won't be disappointed. Charles's vision, and mine, will guide every decision. She released my hand and collected her belongings, poised, precise, and already thinking 5 steps ahead. We'll be in touch. I'll expect your first report within the week. Margaret and I walked Victoria to the door. Outside, the city buzzed as usual, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred behind those glass walls. Once the door closed behind Victoria, Margaret exhaled softly. That went perfectly. I nodded, allowing myself a faint smile. Yes, That went perfectly. With Victoria in alignment, the board's power is effectively neutralized, and we have the strategic leverage we need. The pieces are in place. Margaret looked at me, eyes sparkling with both respect and relief. She trusts you. You earned that, Lucas. You've earned it fully. I turned to look at the skyline, sunlight glinting off the river like a promise. Yes, I said softly. And now, the real work begins. Chapter 13, Legacy Restored. The office was quiet. The city outside shimmered under the blanket of night, its lights twinkling like 1,000 tiny promises, each one a challenge, a possibility, a conquest waiting to be seized. I sat alone in Charles's old chair, the leather worn but still holding the authority of decades of decisions, victories, and legacy. The room smelled faintly of aged wood and polished glass, the subtle tang of history lingering in every corner. On the desk before me sat a small, unassuming box I had discovered behind one of Charles's bookshelves earlier that day. I lifted it carefully, feeling the weight of secrecy, and opened it. Inside lay a single, precious bottle of Pappy Van Winkle, the kind only a man with taste, foresight, and patience would hide. A smile flickered across my face. Charles had always appreciated the finer things, the quiet luxuries that required no announcement, no fanfare. I poured a small measure into a crystal glass, the amber liquid catching the office light, reflecting a miniature skyline within itself. The first sip was warm, smooth, and deceptively powerful, much like the city sprawled beneath me. I leaned back, allowing the glass to rest lightly on my palm, and looked out over Chicago. From this vantage point, the streets seemed almost trivial, the chaos of daily life muted and distant. But I knew the stakes. I knew the power I now commanded. And more than that, I knew the responsibility. This wasn't revenge, not in the petty, vindictive sense. It was restoration. Restoration of a vision that had been nearly derailed by greed, incompetence, and ego. Restoration of a legacy painstakingly built over decades by a man who had trusted me enough to place the future in my hands. I remember Charles's voice, low and conspiratorial, the nights we spent in that study planning for a future no one else could see. They'll underestimate you, Lucas. That's your advantage. Let them believe you're nothing. Then, when the time is right, you take it all. And do it right. Honor the company. Honor the work. Honor me. I sipped the bourbon again, letting the warmth spread through me, grounding me, steadying me. The past week had been a whirlwind of decisions, confrontations, and revelations. The board had crumbled, Victoria Hale had aligned with us, and the company was finally in capable hands. Yet, even as satisfaction settled in, I knew this was only the beginning. The challenges ahead were immense. Expansion plans needed approval, regulatory compliance had to be meticulously monitored, and long-term strategies had to be executed with precision. Competitors would test us. Rivals would attempt to undermine us. Investors would scrutinize every move. But I was ready. More than ready. I was alive with anticipation. I remembered Elena's voice from the previous night, shrill, panicked, accusing. Our marriage teetered on a precipice I hadn't dared to approach since the funeral. But her collapse, her vanity, and her short-sightedness were part of the past now. I didn't need to fight that battle tonight. I didn't need to argue or explain. I only needed to focus forward. Margaret had already drafted the next quarter's action plan, aligning our operations with both strategic foresight and ethical oversight. Her competence was a comfort. She had become not just an ally, but a pillar of the future I envisioned for Montgomery Industries. Every major decision, every expansion, every acquisition would flow through this framework, tested, verified, and executed with precision. I swirled the bourbon in my glass again, watching it catch the reflection of the skyline. Chicago was alive beneath me, unaware of the quiet reckoning that had taken place in its corporate corridors. I thought of Victoria's words this morning. Trust, competence, and accountability. She had placed 18% of her firm's capital in alignment with me, and in doing so, reinforced the path I had set for the company. A faint breeze drifted through the slightly cracked window, carrying the scent of the river and the distant hum of traffic. The city never truly slept, and neither would Montgomery Industries under my watch. There were battles ahead, internal reforms, market expansions, ethical realignments, but for the first time, I felt the exhilaration of control, the rare and intoxicating clarity that comes from both preparation and opportunity converging. I raised the glass slowly, letting the amber light catch the edges. To the city, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else, to the vision, to the work, and to what comes next. The reflection in the glass mirrored the skyline, 1,000 points of ambition, each one a promise of what we could achieve. And then, almost reflexively, I let a small, satisfied smile spread across my face. The thrill wasn't just in having the company, the control, or the leverage. It was in knowing the game, in understanding the rules, in watching the pieces align exactly as they were meant to. This wasn't revenge. It was precision, legacy, and power distilled into its purest form. I swirled the bourbon once more, inhaling its scent, savoring the warmth in my chest, and thought about the months ahead. The restructuring, the expansions, the audits, the meetings, the strategic calls. There would be challenges, inevitable obstacles, and perhaps even betrayals. But none of them would catch me unprepared. None of them would shake the foundation Charles and I had built. The city lights stretched to infinity, a constellation of possibilities. I lifted my glass high, letting the cool glass reflect the glow of the skyline one last time. May it always be this fun, I whispered, voice low but confident, carrying across the empty office like a vow. I took another slow sip, letting the moment settle. Not an end, not a conclusion, just the beginning of a reign meticulously planned, hard-won, and exhilaratingly real. The empire, the legacy, the vision, it all lay ahead, waiting for the first moves of many yet to come. The night deepened, the city pulsed below, and I, Lucas Ward, sat in the center of it all, glass in hand, ready to write the next chapter.